Welcome everybody. I don't know if anybody's out there, but I hope there is. My name is Dave Wilson. I'm nominally a professor of medical education here in Cardiff, but my main other job is to help and guide people in the recruitment and admissions into the medical school in Cardiff. And what I propose to do for the next 45 minutes, or a bit shorter now, is just really chat about the issue of selecting the right medical school. And so I hope this will be of interest to you. Just before I go into the detail, one of the things I think is really important is to understand why you might want to do medicine. And there are a whole raft of books out there and other sources that might persuade you as to why going into a medical career is a useful one. But I think perhaps the most up-to-date one, and perhaps the one that's nearest to our hearts, is the representation, if you like, of the impact of doctors on patients and others in the NHS over the last, 2 years, and perhaps for many others longer than that. But the point is that Adam Kay's book recently sort of drew together a lot of accounts from quite eminent people, some of them are listed there, famous people, to show how important the NHS is and the role of doctors within that. Not to diminish the other healthcare workers, and some of those are picked out in these 100+ stories, but I would encourage you to read it because it does give you a very good understanding of the value of the NHS. Now, this is really comes with what I would describe as a government health warning, and I picked up some recent data. In fact, we only got this from UCAS last week. Well, the graph on the right is the one that's really relevant to you at the moment. And that's what we're seeing at the moment, is this incredible increase in the number of applicants to medicine. And for the first time ever, the number of people who are applying for a second time, having not been successful for the first occasion, has now gone past the number of first applicants as a percentage rise. The other thing that's happening and will continue to put pressure on the system, if you look at the graph, it's taken from The Economist, but they got this data from the Office of National Statistics, which measures everything that's going on in Britain generally. And what you can see, starting at 2020, you can see this progression upwards along this quite steep climb here, showing the population increase in terms of 18-year-olds, the forecast of it over the next 10 years or so. So what the two graphs show is, one is the current situation in terms of pressure on applications into medicine, and also what the trend will be probably over the next 10 years as more people are born and come into that age range of 18+ and want to consider medicine as a career. So that's not to depress you and not to put you off, because that's really not my purpose. And one of the things that is happening, and this is particularly important to say at this Health Careers Live, is that what medical schools are being increasingly expected to do is make sure that they're getting the right representation of society from their medical applicants. And that's quite a challenge. I don't want to go into detail, but what I'm saying is that we're trying to make it more equitable in terms of applications and who gets in terms of a cross-section of our society. The other thing is, I suppose, is that there is an increase in the number of med schools, and there's more on the way by all accounts. So at the moment, there are 41 medical schools. Now, that's quite an increase from even a few years ago. There's 33 in England, 5 in Scotland, depending on how you count them, 2 in Wales, 1 in Northern Ireland. But as I say, there is quite a lot of choice out there. So picking the right one can be quite challenging and quite daunting. So what my job is over the next few minutes is really just to guide you about some thoughts you might have as to where you might want to think about studying. Now you go, well, actually, Dave, it'll be whoever takes me. And to some extent, that's going to be true. But there are other things that really you need to focus down, because you will be able to make 4 choices of medical schools when you come to apply, plus 1 other non-medical application in your UCAS form. So these are things you might want to consider. So first of all, is it in some leafy suburb of some city, or is it in the centre of the city, or indeed is it a campus? Is it remote from anywhere? Is it actually some distance from cities, towns, whatever? So, for example, Cardiff, we're right in the city, and it's a capital city of Wales, whereas Lancaster and perhaps Brighton and Sussex, they are campus universities, and they're at a distance, and there are benefits to both. So you need to think about that. Second thing is size and how big they are. Cardiff is a pretty big med schools, but some of them are quite small, taking somewhere just over 100 medical students, whereas we take close to 300. Then there's the distance travelling. I mean, if you live in Bristol, you don't really perhaps want to think about going to Aberdeen, because there couldn't be a longer journey if you tried. So I think it's really important to think about geography and how easy or otherwise it would be to get to those to the med schools. Think about now, I'm a bit coy about saying this, but there are a lot of rankings out there. I think a lot of them now are getting to the point where they're actually almost meaningless. But there are research, i.e. what the academics within the university and within the medical school research on, and also increasingly teaching has been focused upon as well. What can we do in terms of measuring how good the teaching is in that university and that medical school? So those are things to look at, but I would take some of it with a pinch of salt. I'll come to course type in a later slide, because I think we need to go in that a little bit more detail. Think about accommodation, where you can live, what it's going to cost, and whether it's in a big tower block with lots of other students, or it's in the private sector with you and a landlady or something, landlord. So, think about that. Often students' union are important. They are the, if you like, the activities that centered around students. They are run by a student body, if you like, the union, and they provide a lot of infrastructure and a lot of particularly sports infrastructure for students. Got to think about transport links, and that's not easy in the current time with the rail links being what they are. So always think about how easy it is to get to and from. And finally, you may have colleagues, friends, older people from your courses that have gone to a medical school or to a university, and it might be useful to have their view on whether they think they've made the right choice. But particularly, I think it's important to think about visiting the medical schools that you are perhaps going to shortlist on your application. Now, that's easier said than done in times of COVID, but a lot of medical schools and a lot of universities now are running online sort of virtual open days and opportunities to visit, and you can probably get a fair bit from that without having to perhaps travel and annoy the people at the COP26 meeting by inadvertently traveling large distances for no good reason. So try and do as much as you can online before you then venture off. Now, it may seem an obvious question, well, course length. Well, aren't all the medical courses the same length in the UK, Dave? And the answer is no, they're not. Some have what's called an intercalated year, which is stuck often in the middle of the course. And this, in some courses, is compulsory. So, for example, if you go to UCL, you will do a 6-year course. If you go to Edinburgh, you will do a 6-year course. If you come to Cardiff, you will do a 5-year course with the option of doing this intercalated year in amongst the course, probably usually about third or fourth year. But a lot of medical schools offer you the chance to intercalate, but some of them now are compulsory, and you will have to look out for that. The most important thing is obviously, how does your profile in terms of your qualifications and experiences fit with the entry requirements? I'll come back to that again. Similarly, the work experience question. Interview type, again, if you're lucky enough to get an interview, you're going to have to know what type of interview it's going to be, whether it's going to be a panel of people, whether it's going to be face-to-face or online, and indeed whether it's going to be what's increasingly the most popular format, that's the multiple mini interview. And these, even you think, well, they're all the same, and of course they're not. They're all slightly varied. Some have shorter time periods for the questions to be addressed, others have longer. Some of them make you do exercise as a group, some don't, and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of variation within the interview time. I think probably critically in this slide, the most important thing to say is, well, if you do go and visit your 4 perhaps potential choices. How do they feel? How do they genuinely feel to you? Does it feel like a place you might want to spend 5 or 6 years of your life in? And that, I think, is a very important question. I said earlier, it's the type of course, and there are, well, they're getting a bit more consistent now, but there are a number of different types of courses. There is the old traditional course, and I've spent many years teaching on these types of courses. And that is that you have mostly lectures in the first 2 or 3 years, and then the clinical years are then, if you like, added on at the end. They come after the first 2 years. So there used to be this so-called preclinical clinical split. And there are some universities that still organise their courses that way. And up until about 2013, Cardiff was like that. And I remember tragically, talking to students at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, having them not left a lecture theatre since probably the early morning, and just lecturing, talking at them, rather as I'm doing now, until their eyes bled. And it was not fun for them, or indeed for the staff member teaching. Courses have increasingly tried to become integrated, where they bring in the science teaching alongside clinical training. And that's clearly important, because obviously all decisions that are made clinically have to have science evidence and science base to them. And as a variant of that, there are now formats. They're called different things, but one we've adopted is called Case-Base in Cardiff. And if you go to Plymouth, for example, you would go to a PBL course, or indeed to Manchester, there would be a PBL course there. And these are slightly different, and I don't want to rehearse the differences too much now. So it's important you look into them. The only thing I would say about case-based, because I'm often asked, well, what's the difference between case-based and problem-based? Well, the key difference is that case-based is, to some extent, more guidance is given, whereas problem-based learning tends to be you're left, excuse me, very much to your own devices to investigate the question and come up with the answer. Whereas case-based is a little different, but you need to research this and perhaps speak to people that are on those sorts of courses. And I'm sure there are people out there that would be more than happy to describe the benefits of BBL, or indeed case-based learning. Now, this is probably the most important slide that I'm going to put up this afternoon, because what frustrates me, and I've been at this game, well, in the business of admissions for some considerable time in my career, what I find is there is a lot of exploitation of students. And one of the things I like about Health Careers Live is that hopefully they don't charge you for anything. Your opportunity to come and listen to people like me is provided by them, and we, subscribe, if you like, to Health Careers Live, so that we have the opportunity to give you good advice. But there is the Medical Schools Council, and you can find this on the web. Just type in Medical Schools Council and you'll get access to their site. And that is basically all the medical schools in the UK are represented within this council, and they provide a lot of information. And one of the best sources is this document called Entry Requirements for UK Medical Schools. Now, if you're an old boy like me, you like the old PDF and the sort of hard copy version of it, whereas you can actually, there's a searchable version online, and you can look at whatever your medical school choices might be and see how you fit with their requirements. So it's a relatively easy task, but the key about it is that that information is accurate, up to date, and reliable for that reason. So please make a note in the Medical Schools Council, and please use their resources, and I'll come back to that. I've already said that the resources they provide are brilliant, because they're accurate, they're free, and they're endorsed by the medical schools. After all, we provide them to the Medical Schools Council. They have recently added something called studying healthcare. So this relates not only to studying medicine, but dentistry or pharmacy. I don't know that they couldn't have extended a little bit more and gone into other paramedical careers as well, but hey, maybe they're working on that as I speak. The point I'm coming to is there is on this site this studying healthcare tab, and it's worth having a look at that. Within the site, there is little nuggets of things. I'm not expecting you to read this. The title is the only thing. They're little called info shorts, and these are just basically A4 sheets that give you a sort of snapshot some of the key questions you might be looking into. So if you're looking into the differences between medical schools, much of what I've just said can be found on this info short. What's really cool is this thing at the bottom. It just says test yourself. And what they're saying there is, if you're able to work in a group and think about how you learn best. And this is, you work best in small groups to engage directly with people and so forth. And there's a lot of questions, and that encourages you to think constructively about the differences that exist between medical schools and how you might fit within those. One of the key questions often that's asked of any student that's applying to medicine is, well, do you understand what you're letting yourself in for? And again, there's a lot of detail here. I don't want to propose to go through it, but again, at the bottom there, the last question is test yourself. And there are some things that you, as exercises, you might want to engage with to see if you've got the right idea about what it is you're undertaking. In addition to info sheets, there are info shorts, and these are these little YouTube clips or little clips of people like Fiona here. Fiona Watson's the admissions director up in Liverpool, and Fiona's talking about what makes a good doctor. They're quite short, and there are a number of sort of talking heads doing various sort of interviews talking about some of the questions that you might think about and might want answers to. And again, these are the people that know. They're the admissions directors for the various med schools in the UK. So they are probably, without doubt, the most unalloyed views that you're going to get. You're going to get people that are being honest, forthright, and accurate. So it's worth having a look. Okay, this is how you find it. Now, one of the criticism I have of the medical school's website is that it isn't always that intuitive in finding things. And maybe that's just me because I'm an old dog trying to learn new tricks. But the fact is that the tab to look for is studying medicine. And within that, you can find the various things and much, much more in terms of the details that I just mentioned to you. So that's how you find it. And the next key question is, well, what are medical schools looking for? Now, you'd argue that all medical schools are looking for the same, and to some extent that's true. They're looking for your cognitive abilities, and if that's translated into modern English, it's the brain power that you have, the academic skills that you have. And on the other side, they're checking, or they want to make sure that they're recruiting people that have the non-cognitive abilities that you need to be a good doctor. And these are just graphically represented here. One of them is, how forensic your brain is, perhaps, how you work as a group, how amenable you are, how friendly you are. Are you balanced in your view? Do you have good insight? Qualities like that. And these are not cognitive skills. These are skills that are a function of your personality or your character. So when they come to assess your cognitive qualities, they do this obviously through the time-honored way of seeing what exam results you've come up with. And this is very challenging because there's quite a plethora now of exam formats and types, and it's hard for medical schools to keep pace with these. But obviously the main tariff these days still remains A-levels. But before you get to that stage, because we still have a system which requires that you apply before you sit your final A-level results, the medical schools have to make decisions upon what they know about you from things like your GCSE performance, and then they often add on admissions tests. In fact, I think there's probably only one or two that don't include an admissions test in addition to evaluating things like GCSEs. The two common admissions tests that are used is UCAT or BMAT. And I think there's about 7 med schools use BMAT, and I think there's 20 plus use UCAT. So you can apply with those. So you can apply at sort of 17 in your final year of year 13 of your A-level years, and that's normally how most people apply. But increasingly, and you saw from that graph that I showed earlier, more people are applying with A-levels. So what they're doing is they're getting their A-level results and then applying after they've got them. And there's a lot of sense in doing that. I don't want to rehearse them here, but the clearest reason why you might want to do that is that if a medical school knows that you have met your tariff and all the additional things being equal in terms of their assessment of you, then there's more likely of them offering you a place because you've already got your A levels. They're not leaving it to that sort of period in the middle of August where the exam results are released, and then medical schools have to fill up their places. And the final solution, and this is often what I say to people who have not done particularly well with GCSEs or done well with UCAT or BMAT, or have not done well with their A levels, but have not completely bombed them, then you can maybe think of an alternative route. Now, I'm not naive. Doing a degree first and then doing a 4-year graduate entry medical course puts effectively 7 years of student loan onto you if you can get it for that time. And so, it's obviously best to think about the routes that require it before you have to do graduate entry, at least from the financial point of view, if nothing else. So if they're looking at you in terms of your cognitive abilities, and often these are the things that are written into your personal statement, they're looking for things like, are you people focused? And you've done anything that evidences that sort of social interaction with others. And these are a whole range of them. I don't propose to list them all, but they could be as varied as, working in a nursing home to, working with church groups. They can be interested in your caring qualities, because one of the things that Adam Kay's book is that all the people that are narrated in that book have done something over and above what was expected of them. And that's really about how they put caring for their patients at the forefront of everything they do. So have you shown any examples of that? It can be family responsibilities, it can be working with elderly neighbours, or it could be something as simple as babysitting. Do you work? Do you have any experience of dealing with difficult circumstances, or learning how you interact with people in work situations? So that's a useful thing to think about. And what are your responsibilities at the world at large? And those are often represented through things like things you do at school or indeed your college, but they can be other things. So for example, if we roll back to work, if you're doing a part-time job and you're on lockup at the end of a shift, are you the key holder? Are you the person that has to bank the money? Because that's all really important examples of responsibility that for someone of 17, 18 is a really important quality to have. So those are the sorts of non-cognitive things. Now, as I say, this all percolates through in the personal statement. And I have to be absolutely honest here. They're used to a pretty variable degree these days. Many, and I've just had a 4th year medical student work with me on this and look at what medical schools do at the camp. Many don't really use them in a significant way for selection for interview. And the reasons that's true is because to some extent they're formulaic, and we're going through several thousand applications at the moment, and I can't tell you how often I pick up or look at a personal statement and think, I've just read that, and I realize that I'm on a different candidate, but in fact, the personal statement looks very, very similar. The other thing is that one of the key issues to do with why medical schools are less likely to use them now is that most of what's said there is unverifiable. Now, one of the things you've got to remember is if you are writing something in your personal statement, it is really important to think about who is going to act as the reference for you. It has to be an academic reference as far as we're concerned, but they have to also know you and be able to some extent, endorse some of the things that you have claimed in your personal statement. So it's really important that you have that conversation with the referee and say, actually, I do this, and this is the evidence that I do it, so that they can make sure that when they write their reference, they can confirm to some extent what is being said in the statement. Now, the biggest problem for medical schools is this question now of who wrote it, because there is a lot of people, some of them predatory, some of them less so, but offering commercially to write or help you write a personal statement. And again, we've looked at this, and you can get like a student on a course, medical student, maybe look at it for you, and they may charge you, I don't know, 50, 60 pound, I don't know. But certainly there are some that ostensibly are offering something for 250 pound, and you start to think, that's not fair. Because if we are trying to get representation from all sectors of the community in terms of who gets into medical school, we've got to make sure that people that get advantaged aren't then at the front of that queue, rather than the people that haven't been able to afford things like somebody writing their personal statement for them, or near enough. Then we have to make sure that doesn't happen. So bear that in mind. So the most important thing about personal statement, we still read them, but the most important thing is make it personal. And it's really important that you don't just go online and go, oh, okay, I'll have a bit of that and I'll have a bit of that, because that doesn't really work. Whereas, as I said, the Medical Schools Council has given some very good advice about a whole range of things, but this has been a big issue over the last year and a half, 2 years. Because of COVID, there has been less opportunity for any prospective medical student that wants to apply to medical school to get relevant experience to the study of medicine because of the pandemic. So what you'll find, if you go and look at this guidance they provide, now this is a year or so ago now, but it's still current, what you'll find is there's a lot of links in there to things like the Royal College of General Practice, where they have given you little vignettes to watch, the stuff from Sussex and Brighton, some useful stuff there. There's a whole range of resources, virtual resources, where you can effectively gain some experience, but do it virtually, not necessarily having to go face to face. Now things are opening up a bit as hopefully with the boosters and the new announcement of the new drug that's been announced. So it might be that there'll be increasing opportunities, but it's still worth looking at these resources, because it does give you an opportunity to listen to the presentations or see what's going on, see the patient-doctor interaction and think, oh, how could I have done that better? Or what was the key ingredient there? Or what was the patient really trying to say there? So it's really worth going to this site and getting this information and looking at it as a result. Okay, so what's the game plan? Well, the game plan is, in the usual rotation of things, is that you have to apply in October the 15th. There's no exceptions. We don't accept, pretty much any excuse for late submission. So it's always worth getting ahead of the curve and getting your application in or getting it ready in good time. That then comes to people like us, and we're very busy, and I'm very busy at the moment. As I said, we've got several thousand of these things to go through at the moment, and we've got to look at each and every one of them, because we've got to make sure that we have judged them correctly and that we have scored them correctly, both in terms of their academic and their non-academic criteria that we set for the applicants. And often I'm asked, well, what are the 5 general things that you look at in terms of the personal statement? And they're fairly straightforward. Their insight to a medical career. Is there any evidence of that? Do they have a sort of social conscience? Have they done anything that volunteering wise or things like that? Are they, a team player? Is there anything on there that tells you that they actually can work as a member of a group and contribute things? Are they essentially a loner? Do they just sit in their room all day and do nothing else? Do they have a work-life balance? Well, yes, we need to see some evidence that perhaps if they do sports, whether they're team sports, some narrative to go with that, and so forth. And these are the things that we look for within the personal statement. And we judge them, we score them off, and tick them off and say, okay, well, yes, that person has recorded those qualities, and we think that they're somebody that we would want to have a chat with at interview. So it's really important that you think that whether you're meeting the academic requirements. And I have to say this, it disappoints me enormously, really more on the part of the applicant more than from ourselves. But we do receive applications, and you actually think, did this person ever really look at what we say about, on the page of the medical schools entry requirements, or indeed what's on our website? because often we get applications and the first thing you recognize is that they don't list the GCSEs, or they haven't done UCAT, or they haven't looked at our English language qualification requirements. And so these are frustrating, because what it means is that person has effectively wasted an application to us, because we're going to turn them down, and that's regrettable. But of course, we have no choice, because they haven't met the requirements that we have made of them. And I think if you think of it from our perspective, what you want to, your objective is to try and make sure that your application fits as perfectly as you can to the 4 medical schools to whom you're applying. And it's very difficult, because obviously they can be slightly variable. So, again, it goes back to researching it all and making sure you understand what it is you're dealing with, and making sure that you haven't misjudged it. Okay. Now, the key issue then is, in the next few weeks, we are going to be making our decisions about who we're going to make offers of an interview to. And the one thing that I can tell you is that all vice chancellors and medical schools and dental schools recently got a letter from central government. I'll read it to you, because it's from the Right Honourable Michelle Donnellan and from Edward Arger, who's the Minister of State for Health in the Westminster government. And they have asked us, or they've basically told us, that we are not getting any additional places this forthcoming year. So they're basically saying to medical schools, dental schools, this forthcoming year, and I don't think it's going to change hugely in forthcoming years, in future years, make sure you get the right number of people invited to join your course, because if you make a mistake and you overshoot, there won't be any additional places made available. So it's really important that we make our interview selection accurately as the first step. And what we do in Cardiff, and I don't know the numbers for others, but it's not hugely dissimilar. We usually interview about a quarter to a third of anybody of the applicants to us. Okay, so that gives you a rough idea of, well, if Cardiff get 4,000 applications, they're going to be running about 1,100 interviews, which is what we did last year. Okay, so if you're selected for an interview, okay, there's 2 issues. One is, if you're not selected, you've got to think, well, what have I done? Why have they turned me down? And often they'll tell you pretty quickly what the reason is. If you've been selected for an interview, then that takes you to the next level. You've got to start prepping for that interview. And that then requires that you go back to that the resources I said to you earlier, look at the medical school's website and look at the information and details they provide in terms of interviews. We are running our interviews January, February, but they vary depending on which med school. So keep your diaries fairly clear. I know there will be exam periods and such like that you will be unavailable, and you will have made it clear on your UCAS form when that was. But most of them will be running them January, February. Then you'll be offered. In our case, you'll be doing a virtual online interview, but in real time. You'll have a live person talking to you, but there are variations in this theme to make sure you get an understanding of how the interviews are going to run this forthcoming year, if you're applying this year. So do you get an offer? Well, from that, and what I've said earlier, of those 1,000 interviews, or 1,100 interviews, we probably, last year we made about 500 to 600 offers. I'm sure we'll make less this year, only for the reason that we will have to use a different method for making sure we top up, to make sure we don't overshoot our numbers. Some provide interview performance feedback if you've not been successful, and if you don't get it, then perhaps ask, because those that don't ask don't get. So it's always worth asking if you haven't heard as to why you didn't get an offer after your interview. And then if you have failed to be offered a place after interview, places like Cardiff welcome a reapplication from somebody who's gone through that loop but didn't perhaps perform well enough on the day to get considered for a place that year. So I hope that gives you a sort of understanding of the cycle. So I'm just about 2 or 3 minutes ahead of my deadline, and I don't want to make this too Cardiff centric, because that's not the purpose here, is to encourage you all to think about medical school applications throughout the country. But all being well, and with a good wind and good fortune, this could be you in 6 or perhaps 7 years' time. So At that point, I'll end my talk. I haven't included my email, but I'm happy to take any questions or comments. If you've got a pen handy, my email is dj2.cf for Cardiff.ac.uk. So if you've got any particular questions, I'll be happy to hear from you and perhaps guide you. Anyway, hope that's been useful and enjoy the rest of the event today. Thanks for your interest. Bye now.